All right, so let's take a look. Yesterday, you guys took the exam, and there was only a couple that had not taken it yet. And it's kind of unfortunate because, as I had said before, Unit 4 was going to be the easiest unit. And how many of you guys feel like that? You guys crushed that exam, right? I think the class average was like an 89 in y'all's class, right? And I think it was like a 90 in my other class, right? Those are really, really high averages, right? It's just a relatively easy unit, right? I think learning the cell organelles, their functions, I don't think passive and active transport are all that complicated, okay? And so it's unfortunate some people still have yet to take the exam because most of you guys made hundreds, 95s. How would you feel if you had a 95 and it automatically went to an 85 because you did it one day late? Don't turn things in late, especially exams, y'all. That's a letter grade for some of you guys, that one late day. The exam was great. Like I said, the only questions that were missed were the ones dealing with the osmosis and diffusion problems. You really need to kind of wrap your mind around the whole hyper, hypo, iso, and how that affects the cells. And honestly, I think the easiest way, hypo, hippo. If it's a hypotonic solution, it's going to make the cells swell. Now, I personally like to break words down, right? So I like to understand hypotonic, meaning a low concentration of solute compared to the cell. Hyper means above, so it's more salt and sugar in the outside. Hypertonic is going to make cells shrink. Now, another way to remember this, y'all, soda, like a can of Coca-Cola, is a great example of a hypertonic solution. It is packed full of sugar and salt, right? There's a lot of solute in soda. And that's why if you were thirsty, do you have any business drinking soda? It's a hypertonic solution, right? It's going to take whatever water you currently have in your body and remove it, right? Now, what would be the perfect example of a hypotonic solution? It will always be hypotonic, and it will always cause pure water, right? So if you had a bottle of distilled water, right, it's 100% water. There's no cell in your body that's 100% water, right? You got stuff in your cells, so that water will passively diffuse. So I just, in my mind, hypertonic is soda, hypotonic would be water, right? Now, what's really neat about soda is you can actually use soda to dehydrate meat, right? All right, hold on one second. Thank you for letting me know. What would a freshwater spring be considered? So for most of us, freshwater, is going to be hypotonic, right? However, fresh water from a spring, do you think it's pure 100% water? No, because as it bubbles up through the ground and through the stones, it's going to dissolve some of those minerals in there, right? And honestly, that's why some people like spring water, right? When you go to the grocery store, next time you go to the sodas, there's a section where they sell bottled water in the jugs. There's distilled water and spring water. Some people like spring water. They like the flavor, right? Some of you guys who have well water, you know very well what that tastes like compared to, city water, right? And because your well water does have some dissolved minerals in it, right? And some of you guys who run well water, you may have noticed it. Sometimes around your drains, you get like that brown or yellow, like kind of almost like metallic crust. Those are just the minerals, right? As the water evaporates out of your sink, the minerals crystallize, right? And so fresh spring water, Conlon, would be, it would be hypotonic, right? So it would clearly hydrate us, but there's still going to be some dissolved solutes in it. So hopefully that answers your question. All right. So what do you need to be working on today? Okay. And so our to-do list today would be tackling the article and the video questions. Now, the article is really, really short, as well as the video. They're both dealing with cancer, okay? And instead of doing our warm-up questions on mitosis, I'm going to talk to you guys and just kind of introduce the whole cell cycle, cell life cycle, which is what our next unit is going to be all about. And I'll do that here in just a second. But tomorrow, right, your asynchronous day, please, please, please make sure to get your work in on time, because the clock is ticking. Next week is the final week of the first 9 weeks, and I'm going to have to close that gate on Friday of next week. So if it's from the first, unit 1 through 5, if I don't get it by next Friday, I'm not taking it at all. So you have got to make sure to get ahead and not behind. Not next week, but I think the following week. Does that make sense? I think technically it's Tuesday, but yeah, we'll pretty much count on it. So if you, in your mind for my class, just think unit 1 through 5 is going to be the first 9 weeks. And then unit 6 through 10 will be the second 9 weeks for my class. Okay.
So it'll be like the 20th.
We'll talk about that here in just a second. Because I can actually look it up. I'll need to check a second to look at it. All right. So yes, please make sure to get all your work in on time. And let's go ahead and talk about unit 5, right? Now, you might be thinking, Mr. Collins, what in the world? Why do you have a picture of a seed? Okay. Well, I like seeds. I like gardening, right? And I think they represent the cell life cycle wonderfully, okay? So here in my hand, I have a bean seed, and I've got a corn kernel or a corn seed. And what's really neat about seeds is in the seed, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of plant cells. And we also have cells that have differentiated. In other words, if you look at these diagrams, you can see that there are different tissues. There are different parts to a seed. And each part within the seed has different types of cells. Now, these cells right now are dormant, right? They're lying and waiting. They're not really doing much right now. How can I activate or reinvigorate these cells? Water, right? You guys probably did this in elementary school. You took a seed and put it in a plastic bag with a wet paper towel and checked on it every day, right? So water triggers a chemical change in those cells, wakes them back up, and they resume their cell cycle. And the cell cycle is like the life cycle of a cell. In the same way that I am born, I will grow, I will mature, I will die. Cells do the same thing. Because remember, cells are the basic unit of life. I can actually isolate one of your cells from your body, and we can study its cell cycle, right? We can even talk about how old is the cell, right? In the same way you might ask, how old am I, right? And to figure out how old the cell is, you go back, okay, when did the cell first form? How long is it going to live? And we always talk about average lifespans. Well, cells have average lifespans, right? The lifespan or the length of a life cycle for certain cells is different from one tissue to the next. Now, once these seeds are exposed to water, they all start resuming their life cycles, right? And one of the first things that happens is these cells have been laying dormant. They're waking up. Ooh, and I don't know about you guys, but when I wake up from a long slumber, the first thing on my mind is eating. Now, the seed contains plenty of energy for this rapid period of growth. What do you think is the main source of energy in the seed? Plants store energy for the short term as what polysaccharide? Starts with an S. Starch. So both the bean and the corn kernel contain lots of starch. In fact, if you take a bunch of corn kernels, you dry them out, you grind it into a powder, what do we call it? Cornstarch, right? And so there's lots of starch in there, lots of polysaccharides. Once I expose those cells to water, they will start to hydrolyze, right? Remember, break down starch with water through hydrolysis, and they'll produce glucose. And then the mitochondria will break down the glucose to produce ATP. And knowing what you know now, what can ATP be used for in the cell? As energy, but for what process? We just talked a lot about it in the last unit. Active transport, right? And so now these cells are waking back up. They've catabolized the starch. They've produced glucose through aerobic respiration. They produce ATP, and now they can use active transport. Those cells can start pumping ions and other things in and out of the cells. And so they start to resume their function. And then the cells begin to divide. And the plant, the seedling, gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, what's really neat about the growth of a plant is as the cells in these seeds continue to divide, they're making cloned copies of themselves. They keep cloning themselves and cloning themselves and cloning themselves until they get larger. And then eventually the corn or the bean plant will mature. And then once plants mature and once animals mature, they're ready for what? When the whole plant is mature or when an animal matures. How do we know when you reach adulthood?
Puberty.
Puberty, yes.
Well, not really, to be honest.
But puberty does, from a biological standpoint, once you hit puberty and puberty is complete, that individual, whether we're talking about a plant or an animal, is now ready for what? What kind of reproduction do most plants and animals utilize? Sexual. So this corn and this bean will grow into a mature plant using mitosis. It's a type of cell division that make clone and clone and clone. And then when it matures, they'll both form flowers, which are the reproductive parts of plants. And in the flower, there is a different type of cell division that occurs that produces a different kind of cell. And that division is meiosis. And that makes sex cells like sperm and egg, right? Now, the sperm and egg are more or less useless on their own. The sperm and egg, when they fuse together, now form a new complete organism, right? And so if we were to study the DNA in this bean, 50% of the DNA would have come from the male plant and the other 50% would have come from the female part of the plant. Now, it could be two separate plants or the same plant. That's what's real weird about plants, right? A lot of plants, their flowers are hermaphroditic. And so as like a last chance or worst case scenario, they just sexually reproduce themselves, right? Which is not ideal. And we'll talk about that later and why that can be problematic, right? Now, this next unit, we're going to talk a lot about those two types of cell division, mitosis and meiosis. So you can view those as kind of like the types of life cycles that cells go through. We're also going to talk about something known as cell specialization or differentiation, okay? Now, for those of you guys at home, I would like for you guys to jump into the video and jump into the articles about cancer and make sure to do your vocab. If you've already done all those, I would go ahead and start watching the chapter or the unit 5 videos and start working on the notes. Now, I had someone email me yesterday. Somebody's already ahead of the curve. They emailed me and said, Mr. Collins, on your YouTube channel, there's only one playlist or only one set of videos for Unit 5. There's not a CP and honors. And that's because I kind of blended the two together this go around, okay? So make sure to watch those. I'm going to tell you right now, mitosis and meiosis are a little bit more confusing than Unit 4, right? So don't fall victim to the complacency and think, wow, man, I got a 95 on the Unit 4. I'm rocking and rolling. Let me relax. Let me chill. Mitosis and meiosis can be pretty confusing. They're really, really easy to get mixed up in your head, okay? And then for those of you guys that are here today, some of you guys will be helping me in the garden, plant some seeds, because they will be kind of our model for the cell life cycle. And then eventually we'll talk about genetics and the structure of DNA, and they'll be kind of our centerpiece for the rest of the class. And for those of you guys that are B-Day students, since you won't be here tomorrow, we'll be working in the garden sometime next week. So if you're a B-Day student, go ahead and hit the road and get started on your work. And for love, everything beautiful in the world, if you haven't done your exam, please go do it. I believe so.